Sorry. Yes. Good afternoon to everybody, and good to see everybody again who was here this morning too, and good to see the newcomers who are primarily interested in the Digital Markets Act. So indeed, the Digital Markets Act is the theme for this afternoon. And also here, this is an extremely timely meeting. And this is why I think we can all be very happy that our managers, Filomena Kiriko and Dennis Spaas, have found the time in between all the busy running around to give the presentations for today. So we're very happy with that. Let me give you a short introduction, and then I can explain a bit how the team functions, and then I will be more than happy to hand over to Filomena and Dennis. So maybe by way of general introduction, I said the Digital Markets Act comes at a very timely moment. So I have figures still from 2021. 59% of companies were active on social media, and 20 made use of e-sales, either through their own website or through an e-commerce marketplace. And these figures demonstrate that we, the citizens and also the companies, are to a large extent dependent on marketplaces, search engines, and also online media. What I'm now going to say, online social media. Thank you, indeed. So our companies are dependent on those platforms for being reachable and for doing business and also reaching business users. And we ourselves are dependent on such platforms for purchasing products and services, maintaining our social relationships, also having access to news and democracy and education, but indeed certainly also for what we can call our commercial life. Now, other than the DSA that is primarily there for the societal effects of the platforms, the Digital Markets Act is there for the business and the commercial effects. So the Digital Markets Act was typically an act focusing on market effects, and it was proposed to address the fact that a limited number of platforms increasingly act as a gatekeeper for others. So in digital markets, you probably know, the level of concentration of economic power is unprecedented. And I take this from the impact assessment at the time when the digital market was proposed. As a result of vertical and horizontal integration, the top 7 of the large platforms account for 69% of the total €6 trillion valuation of the platform economy. Now, on the basis of the gatekeepers' extreme scale economies and their zero marginal costs, the very strong network effects and their ability to connect many users with many end users, through the multi-sidedness of their services, also the dependence of the business users to reach the end users, vertical integration, and not to forget the advantages that they derive from collecting enormous amounts of data. So these gatekeepers can substantially undermine the contestability of the markets, and that sometimes also leads to unfair practices. Now, as I mentioned already this morning, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act are two sides of one coin. They are part of one rule book that was harmonized for the whole single market on the same legal basis, and that is Article 114. So we do not look at the two in isolation. So we work throughout the whole European Union and in the digital market, also together with what we call the high-level group, which is a group of regulators that have very special expertise, for instance, in the telecoms world, but also in the competition world, in the data protection world, and in the consumer protection world, and in audiovisual and media authorities. Now, I'm seeing where I am in this. So, indeed, here we are also, like for the DSA, at a key moment in time. So on the 6th of September, we could announce the designation of 6 gatekeepers with all in all 22 core platform services. And that means that we're now in compliance mode, and you will hear everything about that. So maybe before Filomena and Dennis introduce you to that very hectic world with many files and issues running at the same time, it will be a good moment also to introduce to you that actually in the world of the DMA, we are in an unprecedented cooperation within the Commission, in the sense that we form, together with the colleagues who deal with the DMA in DG Competition, one task force. So this is one task force with colleagues from the two DGs working in individual case teams, with managing colleagues also from the two DGs, with one point of entry in the Commission, one database, one IT system, and also one system of preparing and proposing decisions. So this has been done before, somewhat more than 10 years ago in the telecoms world, but then this is it was very much a one-dimensional issue, focusing only on the telecoms regulatory framework. And here we focus on this very broad and very varied world of platforms. So there's also not a team of 20, but a team that is growing to more like 70, 80 colleagues. So this is an unprecedented cooperation, and we were very happy that the machinery works in such a way that very smoothly and successfully it produced these decisions to designate the gatekeepers. And this same machinery now has a vast number of other tasks that the colleagues are engaging in. So I'm very happy that you're interested in this. And I would now, I think, hand the floor to Filomena and later to Dennis to introduce you to what they are doing and what is the background of this legislation for the rest of the afternoon. So thank you very much for your interest and for your attention. There you go.
Thanks, Rita, for the introduction. My name is Filomena Chirico, and I'm here with my colleague Dennis Paras and Sparash, I should say. We are two of the managers, as Rita just mentioned, in charge of the implementation of the DMA. Just a couple of words for housekeeping. This talk, but I guess you are familiar with it, as you have followed the previous sessions of the Connect University. The talk is recorded, and the recording will be available on the Digital EU YouTube channel, as well as, we hope soon, on the DMA website. If you are not aware of it, is Digital-Markets Act. I think you are better off by searching for it and clicking on the link that you find on one of the available search engines on the internet. The slides will be made available on, we will have slides soon to show on the screen, and they will be made available on Futurium. And third point, as you know by now, you can ask questions via Slido, who's also available for you. Okay, so to start with, as I said, I'm the head of unit of one of the units in charge of the Digital Markets Act, which is a cooperation between DigiConnect, so let's say the digital people, and DG Competition, the competition enforcers. And I'll show you also Dennis, who's with me, who's the deputy.
Good afternoon. Nice to meet you all, and looking forward to our discussion this afternoon.
As you can see from the appearance, purple is the color that the team has to wear for enforcing the DMA, and it will also appear on the slides in quite a prominent way. So we are two of the managers. There are 8 managers in total, and a total of nearly I think about 60 case handlers or policy officers, a mix that follow the steps now for the implementation of the legislation. We are also, as Rita was suggesting, sorry. I'm trying to add back on this. Yes, sorry, you couldn't see the purple I mentioned, so now you can. Sorry for the little technical hiccup. So this team, which is growing to about 80 people, we work together, we pull together all the expertise from enforcement, from regulatory experience, from engineering experience. We have some engineers, we have data protection experts, so it's a very multidisciplinary disciplinary and differentiated team in terms of profile. This was a precondition that we thought was necessary in order to be successfully and in an impactful way the enforcers of this new piece of legislation. Both Dennis and I were involved since the beginning, even in the preparation and in the negotiation of the legislation, so we also have historical memory. We might give you some anecdotes. We might reveal confidential information, don't count on it. But let's maybe start a bit with more the substance, and Dennis can start showing the slides. Okay, I don't see if they are shown on the screen. Are they? Yeah, okay. Good. So just to start a bit from the beginning, why did we even do that? So the digital sector has been generally quite free from regulation in the sectoral sense. Now we know we have regulated telecoms, we have regulated financial services, we have regulated the energy sector, but the digital sector, in particular the platform economy, was largely subject only to ex post intervention in case of problems or certain type of rules like the e-commerce directive. We had some attempt at regulating for illegal content or for business relations, transparency relations, like in the P2B platform to business regulation. But this changed last year, when both the DSA and the DMA entered into force, and now the platforms economy is also a regulated sector. But as every regulated sector, only usually in this type of industries, there are some rules that apply to all market participants and some that apply in an asymmetric way. In the case of the DMA, the rules apply only to those that have been designated as gatekeepers. These gatekeepers are some of the most powerful actors in the digital ecosystem, and Rita gave you some figures regarding their economic power in this sense. So the designation of the identification, first of all, and then the designation of those gatekeepers has been done on the basis of their economic power, of their impact on the European internal market, and the fact that they have become a gateway for the relationship between business users and end users. So in the intermediary position, which has become not a nice to have, but nearly a must have for the market participant. Another important element not to forget about the DMA is that this is what we call an ex ante regulation, which means that the rules apply to the designated entities, or to the regulated entities. And it's not that we are accusing the entities of having done anything wrong, is that these are the rules that they have to respect, regardless of whether they were doing it or not in the past. So we'll see a bit later in the slides also examples of these practices that we consider particularly harmful when performed by those that have the position of gatekeepers, and therefore they are prohibited or imposed if there is a need of a positive obligation, regardless of any wrongdoing from the past. Of course, we all know, or those that are already familiar with the DMA, you know that we have collected some experience also via competition cases or the previous regulatory experience on what are the elements of the behaviors or some structural elements that may be problematic. Rita anticipated some of those a minute ago, so it's not that we started from scratch when we proposed this particular regulation in this form. Third important element for the DMA is that, of course, you cannot have rules without having a means to have them respected by those that decide that they might not care about the rules. And that's why we have remedies, we have sanctions, which can get quite heavy in case of repeated infringements, and there are also remedies that can be imposed, which can go all the way to be structural remedies, to change the structure of the market or the structure of a company that has violated them. The additional novelty of this system is that the legislators, so the European Parliament and the member states that are responsible for adopting legislation in the EU, decided that for companies of that size and for a market like a sector like the digital sector, which is so big that it doesn't stop at national borders, the Commission should be the prime enforcer and the exclusive enforcer of these rules. And that's quite a novelty. And together with what those of you who followed this morning presentation on the DSA have heard, this is also the case for the very large online platforms under the other piece of legislation. They are two sisters, by the way, they are girls, not only two sides of the same coin. So I mentioned already the complementarity with all the other pieces of legislation that exists, the sister DSA, but also the cousin, the P2B regulation. Actually, it's an uncle, probably, the P2B regulation, I would say, because it actually taught some of the things that are now in the DMA, how to do them. And the competition law, of course, which is the other uncle, or maybe that's even a father or a mother, maybe. But I would not dwell too much into the family ties between the DMA and the rest. But maybe, Dennis, you want to go a bit further into saying how we do it, what are we looking at, what have we been looking into? Just for you to know, we have been spending the whole summer on this and more. So everything you need to know is in our heads, and you will hear some of it.
So thank you for reminding me about not having a summer, not only about the weather, but in general. And I do hope that you also see the pink style shirt, which very much fits into the slides. Just maybe the first thing that I think it's good to remind ourselves when we come to the DMA is, the scope of the DMA and what are we actually talking about beyond the general principles and the postulates that Filomena was talking about. I think the first important thing that one needs to remind ourselves is the scope and which are the services which are actually covered by the Digital Markets Act. And on this slide, you will see 10 of them, which are specifically defined and listed in the DMA itself. An interesting fact, as a bit historical background or anecdotal background, is that the initial Commission proposal only had 8 of those listing in the proposal of the Commission. And then in the context of the co-legislative process, it has been decided that there are 2 additional ones that feature similar characteristics than the other 8 and which should be listed on that list. One of these is the web browsers, and the other one is the virtual assistants. Those 2 core platform services have been added in the context of the legislative process by the co-legislators. But just very quickly to remind ourselves which are the other 8 core platform services that we have in the scope of the DMA. The first one that you can see on the slide is online intermediation services, something which is quite, that everybody is quite familiar with. Rita already referred to a number of such online intermediation services, and we are using many of them on a daily basis. Let's, call, some of them out, like online marketplaces, like online social network services, like video sharing platforms. But as you will see, while those may be, falling within a specific category of core platform services, they may also be subject to a very specific of those categories. Like, for example, online social networking services are specific core platform service, same for video sharing platforms. Then another one that I think we all use on a daily basis, and I think Filomena was referring to it if you want to find our dedicated website, which is online search engines. Then operating systems, we engage with those every day, but we don't really know necessarily. You know, when we use our phones, when we use our computers, I think that's one of those services that the very expensive hardware we buy would not really be worth much if there wouldn't be for the operating system. Then cloud computing services, video sharing platform services, as already mentioned, number-independent interpersonal communication services, very, very long name. Let's call them, you know, in a plain language, messenger services. Again, something which we use probably on a daily basis, and maybe not only one, but few of them every day or even every hour. Social networks already mentioned. Online advertising services, again, something which is very important part of the Digital Markets Act, as we will see a bit later on, and already mentioned web browsers and virtual assistants.
So as we said, we wanted to say something confidential. Dennis, what's your favorite CPS?
My favorite CPS? Such a difficult question. Probably messenger services, because I'm kind of dependent on it on a daily basis for, you know, talking to my boss, both at home and at work. So, yes. And yours, maybe?
Well, you took my favorite one, but then I'll take my second favorite, and it's I take the online advertising services, because they are a bit special. They are not a CPS, a standalone CPS. They only exist under the DMA if they are provided with another CPS. So this is something that triggered quite some reflections and discussion, and it's an interesting way of looking at from a different perspective to CPS. Hope that satisfies also your curiosity, but maybe we can explain why the legislators picked those CPS and not other things, not other services.
I want to make one remark about your favorite CPS, which is like, you know, I just think about the impact on your wallet, you know, but let's jump over that one. So let's come indeed why the legislators felt that those are the 10 core platform services that have to be included in the scope of the DMA. And on the slide, you will see, as already mentioned also before, the DMA focuses on core platform services and on the undertakings which provide those core platform services and for certain conditions. So how were these services identified? First criteria, which has been considered very important, is the fact that, you know, we are talking about highly concentrated markets, platform services, something which I think Rita already in her introductory remarks very clearly referred to. Then another point, which is kind of emanation of the first one in a way, is there are only very few large digital platforms which provide the services, or if not that, which are able to set the commercial conditions irrespective of anyone else that may be, you know, either using those services as end user or business user, or even competing with those services in one way or another. Then many of these, or some of these large digital platforms, not only that they are able to set those commercial conditions independently from all these players, but also they may act as gateways for the business users to reach their consumers, and the other way around. So in a way, in non-technical terms, let's call it that way, you know, they are considered indispensable for either of the two sides of the platform to reach the other side. And then what has also been observed and considered as a very important factor in the context of determining which these services are, that we often observe in relation to them, you know, a specific behavior which may undermine in one way or another fairness on the market or the contestability of the services that we are observing. And again, you know, on a slide, you will simply see this as referred as unfair behavior. If we move on, maybe Filomena, if you want to go into more details, who are the ones, and how do we determine who are the gatekeepers?
So we had long discussions also in the context of we witnessed the long discussions in the context of the negotiations at the genesis of the legislation. Because how do we determine, how is the Commission as an enforcer supposed to determine who are those companies that act as gatekeepers in digital markets? So the legislator settled for first of all, a presumption based on quantitative criteria, and gave us also the task of analyzing via market investigation whether there were other companies that do not fulfill the quantitative presumption and nevertheless should be considered gatekeepers because they have the characteristics of gatekeepers. So these characteristics, which are indicated at the beginning of the DMA text, is the significant impact on the internal market. So the EU law nerds know that this is a general expectation. If you regulate at EU law, at EU level, is because there is an impact on the internal market. Second criterion is that it should be an important gateway, so an intermediary that is must have for business users to reach end users and vice versa. And third, must be a position of gateway that is not just temporary or just ephemeral. It should be an entrenched and durable position. So the three criteria have been further specified in quantitative terms because these are the general, this is the general setting that every gatekeeper is expected to have if it is a real gatekeeper. But then, as I said, there is a presumption, and the presumption is based on what does it mean to have a significant impact on the internal market. This is a size criterion, basically, an economic strength criterion, and is based on turnover or alternatively market capitalization. And there it's also some of the interesting stories from the negotiations because, or the preparation of the legislation, when the discussion was what does it mean to be economically powerful in digital markets? Maybe it's not anymore the turnover, because many of those companies are actually making losses before actually becoming profitable, and yet they are gateways for business users and end users. So how do you measure the economic strength, the economic power? And that's where the criterion of market capitalization came up to say this is a figure, this is the market valuation that allows such a company to raise enormous capitals if they need them. And this is something that has been particularly evident and has been particularly used in the digital sector, and that's why this has been used as one of the alternative criteria to decide on whether a company is a gatekeeper or not. And this cannot be happening in only one of the countries within the EU, but has to be happening in at least 3 of the European Union member states. As regards the gateway, that's all about the between end users and business users. Well, that's about the users. So how many users are there? And since it has to be, the gatekeeper is a gateway between 2 sides, so we have a threshold criteria for both sides of this of the market in which these gatekeepers are operating. On one side, we have the end users, so and it will not escape the most attentive of you that this is the exact same figures that the legislator put in the DSA for very large online platforms. So it corresponds to roughly 1/10 of 10% of the European population. So if a company reaches as users that correspond to at least 10% of the European population, then they can be considered as having an important size and a significant size. But differently from the DSA, here there is also the other side that is relevant, because there is not just about the impact on the reach on the end users, on the recipient of service, as we call them in the other context, but this how many is there a significant amount of business users that are also dependent on this platform, and here the minimum level has been fixed by the legislators in 10,000 yearly business users. And I think that I have spotted already, and I take advantage for that, a question on slide about business users. How do they know that they have users, and how do they report them? And in fact, the DMA has a specific annex explaining how companies should calculate business users and end users, differentiated per service, so per the CPS that Dennis spoke about a minute ago. And how do they report them? Well, there is a notification obligation once they meet the thresholds, and that's we'll get there in a minute. Just one last point about the entrenched and durable position, which is established on the basis of having this number of users, at least for the last 3 financial years. So that's the criterion. And since Dennis mentioned that we had no summer, not only for the meteorological point of view, it's going to show you now and explain to you a bit why this was the case.
Thank you, Filomena. And indeed, today reminds me a little bit of maybe 2 or 3 weeks in July and August that actually didn't look like summer in Belgium. So it was not that bad at the end of the day. But indeed, just to very quickly why we didn't have summer, but also what was happening before summer, during summer, and what is a bit happening now, and what we will be talking a little bit more in details later. So just very quickly, the DMA, the political agreement on the DMA between the co-legislator was reached at the end of March 2023. And then, as you probably all know very well, there is still some process at the technical level that needs to take place before the act is actually published. Once it's published, it enters into force 20 days after, and that entry into force for the DMA happened on 1st of November 2022. And then the entry into application of the regulation, so when the rules actually start to apply, was 6 months later, which was on 2nd of May of 2023. One of the first obligations, and related to what Filomena was saying, one of the first obligations was for the companies that provide one of the 10 core platform services we referred before, to assess whether they meet the thresholds which were presented by Filomena before, and if so, they need to notify that to the Commission. Now, they had 2 months to comply with that obligation, and essentially the deadline for notifications was 3rd of July of 2023. Normally, any process takes time. The DMA envisaged very specific timeline for the Commission to deal with those notifications, and the timeline is, let's say, very ambitious and also very short, which is 45 working days, which fit almost perfectly within the summer period between 3rd of July and 6th of September as really the last day when the Commission can take a decision on these notifications. And as you will have seen, those decisions have been taken on 5th of September, by which, and very soon you will hear much more about it, by which the notifying companies were informed that they actually are designated as gatekeepers, or at least some of the notifying companies. At the same time, we also open few market investigations, and again, here is only about the timeline. We will talk much more about that as we go along with the presentation. And not to, completely think that, our work stopped, rather to the contrary, I would say. You also see on the slide that by 7th of March of 2024, all the companies that have been designated have to comply with the obligations. And as you will see also in one of the slides later on, and we will go into more details about that, there are a number of other activities that are taking place between designations that took place on 5th of September and 7th of March of 2024, and even beyond that timeline. But now I'm sure you're all very much interested, who was designated, for what they were designated. So Filomena, can you please give us a bit of a light on that?
Well, we have the by now famous slide with the little robot, which lists the designated gatekeepers on the 5th and 6th of September. This became public on the 6th of September. We received, so Dennis said, and we mentioned before, companies that consider to meet the threshold have to notify to the Commission their figures and for which services they meet the threshold. So 7 companies notified the Commission that they met the threshold for a number of services. In these notifications, they described which services they were providing, and some of them requested to analyze whether the presumption, as I said before, this is a presumption, is not a definitive conclusion, what is in the legislation. For some of the services, some of the companies asked to consider whether this was not actually a false positive, that they made the threshold, but not really by being a gatekeeper, just by being big, but not fulfilling this gateway function that is needed to be supervised under the DMA. So what the results I'll give, first this is a snapshot of what actually was the conclusion, and then the rest of the presentation will be devoted in explaining a bit what is a bit more the juicy details of what was actually in under discussion to get to these conclusions. So we had, as I just said, a number of services notified per company, and we concluded that out of the 7 notifications, 6 of the companies should be designated as gatekeepers, and for a number of services. Now, this slide shows the number of services, so the services that belong to each of the categories that Dennis spoke about before. So if you see, there are 4 social networks that have been designated, quite a few intermediate services, 3 advertising services, and so on. And the colors that you see on the slide are also meant to show that actually the same company might be offering more than one service belonging to the same category. So you see 3 Google services in the intermediation box, see 2 Meta social networking services in the social network box, the same for the NICs, the messaging systems, the same thing, there are 2 from the same company. So this is a bit to explain also the color code of this particular slide. So, as I promised, we'll go a bit more into the details of each of the service and each of the designation in a minute. But before that, just to continue a bit the story of the summer holidays or the non-summer holidays. So the timeline that is the one that is established in the legislation, what does it look like now that we have the designations? So as you see, we have, as we saw a minute ago from Dennis, in July we had the notification, and in September we had the designation. Now, since the DMA is based its presumption on figures belonging to certain financial years, well, in a few months we'll have a new financial year. So there may be new companies, or maybe even some of those that have already come to us, that says like, well, in the new financial year, actually, now I meet the threshold. So after January, there are, and some of them have even publicly made the point that they will come to us with new information because they consider, and once again, that's also a very important point, it's the company that self-assesses that they meet the threshold. And then we have to look into it, whether we agree or not, and whether we agree also in their description of the boundaries of the service and so on. So we may see, or probably actually we will see some new notifications coming up. So again, stay tuned on the DMA website, because this will also be, for what is non-confidential, made available on the website. So depending on the time when the notification comes, we will again have 45 working days, and this time they will come rather in the winter, not in the summer. So depending on when it comes, I don't know if between March, April, May, we might have new designations of new gatekeepers. We may. That's not yet guaranteed. Which means that 6 months later, they have to show that they comply with the obligation. So it's the same timeline that for the existing ones, but those that have been designated in September, but of course pushed a few months forward because a few months later in the year because of the timeline of the imposed determined by the legislation. What I said is just a moment ago is the companies may also want to argue, and some of them have argued that despite meeting the threshold, they nevertheless are not to be considered as gatekeepers. This is specifically foreseen in the DMA. So as I said, it's not that once you meet the threshold is the end of the story. So some notifying companies have come to us to say, like, look, I have the numbers, I have the users, I have the market cap, and yet I'm not a gateway, and I will show you how. Now, the legislation is particularly strict on this point. Once again, the negotiations were quite tough on this because one of the points, why do we have all these deadlines that are very short and very strict and so proceduralized? That's because the legislator thought, I don't want you to waste time. This is a regulation, is clear enough, it's straightforward enough, it's direct applicable, companies have to respect it, and it's already written black and white in the law. So now go fast and don't waste time. Neither the companies nor the Commission. So what we got was a very strict test for determining whether, when the threshold is not met, is met, nevertheless a certain service can be excluded from the application of the DMA. And they say it's not only an exceptional tool, but also it has to be sufficiently substantiated arguments on the side of the gatekeepers, so as to manifestly put into question the presumption, manifestly. So it's not something that we have to discuss for ages. It's something that has to be decided either within the 45 working days, and that's, if you look at the slides and the steps that are there, is the last step, the acceptance. So in 45 working days, we can already determine whether this is manifestly put in the arguments brought forward are manifestly putting into question the presumption. And here are the three examples that after consideration, the Commission concluded met this test. The other extreme is in 45 working days, the arguments presented are not putting in question, not manifestly putting in question. It's already obvious that we don't even need to look further, and therefore we can reject them, the request for rebuttal right away. And once again, we have 3 examples of direct upfront rejection within the 45 working days. The third option that the legislator put for the Commission is, okay, the arguments are sufficiently substantiated, and yet maybe you want to look into them a bit further because they are not fully conclusive. So they are good, they manifestly put into question, but you want to assess them, maybe verify them with third parties and with the rest of the market, because the designation process is quite, in the intention of the legislator, quite a restrained process that happens with the Commission that analyzes the notification received and takes a decision on that basis. So there is no time for market investigation or things of the like, but for a rebuttal for which there are good reasons, but maybe not completely, then the market investigation was considered a good way of figuring out whether ultimately the service should be subject to the DMA or not. And this is now currently ongoing for the 4 services, 3 from Microsoft Bing, Edge and Ads, and for the Apple iMessage. The timeline for the market investigation. Now, once again, as I said, the legislator said, you commission, you gatekeeper, shall not waste time. So market investigations for rebuttals, they have to be done within 4 months. So they have to, we opened those by the end of the designation period. So together with the designation, we opened this market investigation. So at the beginning of next year, there will be a decision saying yes or no, these services are subject or not to the DMA, and this is currently ongoing. So this is one of the things that kept us busy after the relaxing summer of 2023. It will not, again, it will not have escaped the most attentive of you that we also opened different market investigation. We opened market investigation for the qualitative designation. So the quantitative criteria is also not the end of the story. You can be a gatekeeper if you are a significant impact on the internal market, you are a gateway and you have an entrenched position, even if you don't meet the threshold. And this is what we are currently now also busy with, looking into what the situation of the operating system for the iPad is. We opened investigation again on the same day as the designation. For this, the legislator was slightly more accommodating. It gave us about a year. I have to say we are now starting it. We are looking into the characteristics of this particular service, and we are trying to find information. So at the very latest, by September next year, we will have an answer, maybe earlier. But as I promised, we want to discuss a bit more in detail the service that we have actually designated. And so one by one, we will have a presentation by Gatekeeper, and we will tell you a bit more about each of them and each of the services. So I would now give the floor back to Dennis, because I always speak too much, so I'm happy to share with Dennis. And starting with, you know, maybe some small company with very little services, no? So.
Thank you, indeed. And just to explain the methodology behind the order, it was not by size or anything, but it's really, you know, we try to be as objective as possible, which means we go by alphabet that everybody can follow. Having said that, the first company that comes on our mind is then Alphabet. And as...
Say the pun is intended, right?
Yes. Indeed. So just to go more into the details of the slide that you have already seen, you know, where you had 6 gatekeepers that have been designated, and you saw the 22 core platform services. You will see on this slide. You will see on this slide, sorry, again, a bit of technical issues. That's always good just for, you know, a bit of excitement. But also on this slide, you actually see a bit more details of the core platform services that were listed in the designation decision of Alphabet. You will see that you will see the 3 online intermediation services, so Google Shopping, Google Maps, and the Play Store. Again, these are the type of services that I think we are using on a daily basis. And maybe, you know, when it comes to these services, if we talk about the question which was, you know, occupying our mind in relation to most of the services on this slide will probably be, you know, what is the exact scope and what are the boundaries of a specific service in question. But then, for example, there were also some more specific questions when it comes to some of these services. So one of the questions that arises in particular in relation to those services that are covered by the DMA that are, you know, available across quite different devices, for example, app stores, which Google Play is, whether, you know, there is one single app store irrespective of the device on which it is accessible, or whether, you know, there are different app stores across different devices. And as you will see on this slide, and then later on another slide for another app store, our conclusion following the assessment was that there is, you know, one app store irrespective of the device on which it can be accessed. Then As I already mentioned, another question that was occupying our mind quite a lot was, what is the exact delineation of some of the services? And for example, this was occupying our mind quite a lot in cases where in the digital environment, we are all fully aware that many of these services are provided in a quite integrated manner, and they're quite interlinked. So for a typical example of such very tightly connected services that are provided together is, for example, in case of Alphabet, on one side, it's online search engine, so Google Search. On the other side, it's online advertising services, since in relation to the provision of the online search, very often you will also be exposed to the advertising. So when it comes to the Google Search, one of the questions that we were occupied with was the assessment, what is the scope, what are the boundaries of Google Search, and when Google Search stops becoming Google Search, and we actually talk about a provision of the online advertising services. In relation to online advertising services, again, there was a bit of a question of the scope of these services, and following the assessment, we concluded that all advertising services, any tool, any feature, any functionality that interact with each other in view of providing advertising services to the users should be considered as part of the online advertising service. One, again, point which I think it's quite important, and where I mentioned at the beginning, one of the core platform services that maybe we are not daily thinking about it while we are using it all the time, is the operating system, and Google also provide one of those, which is Google Android. And one of the questions, again, in relation to that service was, what is exactly the scope of operating system, which is called Google Android? And one of the clarifications following the assessment and the determination was that the middleware forms part of the operating system. Again, relatively technical question, but something which is very important in view of determining the scope of the service in a clear manner, so that all the obligations that are identified in the DMA apply to the relevant service. And then last but not least, and that we already have heard, I think, a few times today, Alphabet also notified its number-independent interpersonal communication service, but in this case, not the messenger services that we usually associate with that word, but rather the email service. And in that case, Alphabet also put forward a number of arguments arguing that this service should not be designated as a gateway, important individual gateway. And indeed, as Filomena already mentioned on the previous slide, our assessment showed that indeed the arguments which have been put forward were first sufficiently substantiated, and then also really manifestly called into question the presumption that is laid down in the DMA. Having said that, maybe we move to another company in the alphabetical order. And since Filomena was saying that she really likes the online advertising services, and I think for that specific company that's quite relevant, I really would like to hear her views about it.
Well, if we go by alphabetical order, after Alphabet, we have Amazon. So Amazon has notified its services, and the Commission has agreed with them that there are two services. Agreed, maybe it's a long shot, but at the end, the conclusion of the Commission is that there are two services offered by Amazon. One is the marketplace, or the online intermediation service, and is provided through what I'm sure many of you have come to know, the Amazon store. And Amazon also offers its own advertising service. So I mentioned before, the reason why I find advertising particularly interesting is that under the DMA, it only is relevant if it's provided with another CPS. So in this case, we have the marketplace, the intermediation service, and we have the advertising service offered by Amazon. So the advertising service, and that's also an interesting thing to keep in mind. That was what the designation decision concluded. All services, tools, features, interfaces, and functionalities that are needed to provide the advertising service, they are all part of the same service. So if anybody out there is thinking about markets and whether the boundaries of any definition, this is not on our radar. What the DMA asks us to do is to define what is in the service, and advertising service, to provide the advertising service, many different features, many different sub-services or interfaces might be needed, and they have been all considered as part of the same CPS. Should I continue another one? So Dennis spoke about, 8 or 9 services. So now I spoke about 2. So I will increase the number of services by going to, still in alphabetical order, to Apple. Apple notified also a number of services, and we designated, similarly to what you heard Dennis explaining about Alphabet, we designated the App Store from Apple, and the designation decision explains that an App Store is the same service regardless of the device on which it is offered, so from which it is accessed, and therefore it's designated as one service. In fact, those of you who have made the presentation in the morning, they've noticed that actually the same approach was also followed for the Digital Services Act. So also as a very large online platform, app stores have been designated irrespective of the device on which they are provided or they are accessed from. The other service of this type is the browser. So as you heard, we have designated from Alphabet, we have designated Chrome, we also designated Safari. It fulfilled the threshold of the DMA. We also have designated the operating system for the iPhone, the iOS. Now, Dennis already explained this point. The operating system is a bit of a different piece of software than the App Store or the browser are, so a bit of a different service, because in this sense, a device cannot even function without an operating system. So in this case, you have different piece of softwares that are needed to operate different devices. And for the iPhone, the operating system did meet the threshold of the DMA. However, we also found that iPadOS, so the operating system for the iPad, was not quite fulfilling the thresholds, but yet in our first analysis, it did have some of the characteristics that could lead to a qualitative designation. And that's why we opened the market investigation into a qualitative designation. This is ongoing, so we'll see. I mentioned it before. I think there is a question in Slido on what exactly is a market investigation. Well, market investigation is where we are asking to provide, we have a bit more time than roughly 2 months, the 45 working days, so we can actually collect more information, not only from the company concerned, but also from other market participants, those that work with the companies. We can talk to them, we can ask them to provide information, document, analysis. Maybe there are studies that we can, if we have the time, we can even procure studies specifically to help us understanding the characteristics of the way the service is provided and whether it fulfills the 3 criteria I mentioned before of significant impact on the internal market, the gateway position, and the entrenched position. So this is what we are doing at the moment, and it's a lot of collection of information and discussions and verifying the data, collecting data, analyzing the data. So this is what a market investigation is about. Some market players might receive or have received questions from the Commission. So I think if anybody's out there from the sector, well, help us understanding. We have no prejudgment on where we're going to land, neither for one or the other type of market investigation. We want to understand. And we will decide on the basis of facts, data, and evidence. That's what we are doing at the moment. So, speaking of market investigations, Apple also included in their notification their iMessage service. So, from the decision designating the other 3 services, we concluded that this is also a service subject to the DMA, is one of the messaging services, an EX. In jargon. However, Apple had presented good arguments. I'm simplifying not to repeat the sufficiently substantiated, etc. So the arguments that were good enough, but yet not, which we thought we needed to assess a bit further. And that's why we opened this, again, famous market investigation, and we are inquiring with the market to verify our understanding, basically. Dennis, over to you. Let's split a bit more.
Sure. And if you allow me, maybe, so this is the first time we actually go backwards in slides, but just, because we are trying to be as connected as possible. So we have seen on slide that there was a question whether Amazon notified the Amazon Web Services, so their cloud service. And just to maybe to explain a little bit, and to repeat some of the things that maybe have already been said. So the DMA envisages a self-assessment and a notification mechanism. And of course, we have been in the pre-designation discussions with a number of companies, including those that have been finally designated, also in relation to some other services where the question may have arose whether those services may also meet the thresholds. But at the end of the day, it is, imperative of the companies concerned, it is obligation on them to undertake such a self-assessment and to notify the services, which they feel, their self-assessment shows that they meet the threshold. In case of Amazon, the company did not notify their cloud service, which of course by no means that the cloud services are neither covered by the DMA or in the future they may be designated as a gatekeeper core platform services, either the one of Amazon, as the question was about Amazon, or any other cloud computing service provider. But of course, this may, again, as Filomena was already explaining, take place through different means. Either the company concerned meets the thresholds, or, there may be also some other indications that would point to the fact that, one would need to undertake a market investigation to establish that. But this was just a slight step back to answer the question in Slido. Now, the next one in the alphabetical order is ByteDance, which maybe, not everyone knows by that name, but rather by the service which is often used on a daily basis. So ByteDance notified on 3rd of July its TikTok service, and similar to some other discussions that we had in relation to some other service, one of the questions that arose in relation to designation of TikTok was the qualification of the service, because the notification considered that TikTok is a video sharing platform service, while our assessment showed that it's actually an online social networking services, which in itself doesn't mean that TikTok does not meet the criteria for being a video sharing platform services. It's just that we consider that when taking all the features and functionalities of the service all together, it rather, meets the requirements of the online social networking services and not only of the video sharing platform services. Another point which was part of the assessment in relation to notification of TikTok was the assessment of the arguments which have been put forward by ByteDance in relation to the fact that even though TikTok meets the quantitative thresholds, and therefore the presumption, the company felt that they should not be designated as a gatekeeper for that specific service for a number of reasons. Following the assessment, which we have undertaken within 45 working days, and as Philomena already mentioned, this was one of the examples where, based on the facts and arguments which have been brought forward, we already established within those 45 working days that those are not sufficiently substantiated to manifestly call into question the presumption, and therefore we have continued with the designation of TikTok as an online social networking services. If we now move to the next one, and I think Philomena is probably better placed to talk about this one because she uses more of the services on the slide. I will maybe invite her to talk about it.
I hope you don't want me to disclose which of those services I use. I can say I use several of the services of the gatekeepers, as probably many of the people listening to us are as well. And that's why I have high hopes in the DMA and in the DSA to keep us safe, open, and testable. So that's what also makes your work more interesting, because actually you are, you know what, you live through many of the things that you work with. So for Meta notified, well, let me put it like this. We designated 6 services from Meta as a company. But Meta notified actually WhatsApp, which was designated, so it's as a messaging service, but they notified all the other services as a single CPS. We had long discussions, and ultimately the conclusion of the discussions was that we needed to consider several of those services as distinct from one another, so not just one and the same. So Facebook is one social network, Instagram is another social network, Meta Ads is a separate service. I mean, the advertising, online advertising, as we said, can only exist if it's provided with another service. So it was by a bit by definition that they would be notified separately. That they would be designated separately. The other services we designated is Messenger. Messenger has evolved to be in a way that it fulfills the definition of number-independent interpersonal communication service according to the telecommunication code, and it's such a self-sending service that it was considered as distinct from the other ones. The same for Marketplace, which is also available through the Facebook platform. Now, just one thing to clarify, the DMA explicitly foresees a situation where services could be offered through the same platform and still be different CPS. It's the legislator has thought about that, has put it black and white, so we have just applied the provision to the different situations we had encountered, and this was one of those in the case of Meta, but not only. It has been the case for other services, for Alphabet. Dennis spoke a second ago. We also had to analyze this, and a bit the same or similar type of discussion we had also for other notifying gatekeepers. For example, the next one you want to take now?
Yes, sure. So the next one in our order is Microsoft. And, you know, probably when one mentions Microsoft, there is one service that we are all exposed almost on a daily basis, because we use computers which are very often enabled by their operating system, Windows, which we all know very well. So that was one of the core platform services that Microsoft notified, and where we have established that indeed they meet the thresholds and that this is an individual gateway in sense of the DMA. There were some discussions in relation, again, to the scope of the service which should be designated. Notably, are there different operating systems depending on the processor, and then also, you know, which versions of the operating system are actually to be falling within the scope of the designated operating system, you know, only those which are running on the PC, or also those that are maybe delivered by different modes. So again, as you can see, very often the discussions that we have had in relation to the designation were related to the scope of the designated service. Another service which Microsoft notified, and again, where the thresholds have been met, and where it was mainly a discussion about, again, the scope of the service, is an online social networking service, LinkedIn. And as Filomena mentioned, for some other services already that were designated as, let's say, gatekeeper services, also LinkedIn, for example, has been designated as a very large online platform under the DSA. The analysis which we have undertaken in the context of the notification of LinkedIn was in particular focusing on, you know, how to treat a number of integrated services and features which are provided, you know, together with the LinkedIn social network, you know, whether they constitute distinct services or whether they constitute an integral part of the online social networking services. So these were the main issues that were occupying our mind in the assessment, and then also reflected in the designation decision. So these are the two core platform services of Microsoft that have been notified and have been also designated on 5th of September. There was one service which has been notified, and I think already mentioned in the slide when we talked about the rebuttals, where following our assessment, even though the service met the thresholds and therefore the presumption, Microsoft put forward, again, number of arguments which aim to demonstrate that this service doesn't act as a gateway, and that's their email service, outlook.com. And indeed, following our assessment, we established, similarly to what we have established in relation to Alphabet's Gmail, that this service does not constitute an important gateway, and therefore it has not been designated, and the rebuttal has been accepted within 45 working days. At the same time, similarly to what Filomena already mentioned for Apple in relation to iMessage, Microsoft also put forward a number of arguments which try to rebut the presumption in relation to 3 additional services where the thresholds are met, but where company feels that these are not individual gateways. One is their online search engine service, which is Microsoft Bing. The other one is their web browser service, which is Microsoft Edge. And the third one is their online advertising service, Microsoft Advertising. In relation to all these 3, we are currently conducting a market investigation that we have referred to just before. And again, these are the rebuttal market investigations. So the timeline within which we are working is the one of 5 months. And again, you know, I can just reiterate what Filomena said, you know, to the extent that we have listeners that can contribute to our informed decision on the, you know, the gatekeeper status of these services, please, very much welcomed. And maybe now we move to, well,
before we move, there is the same question that you spotted about AWS is also coming for Azure. So let's maybe explain a bit the principle here. So as Dennis explained before, companies self-assess whether their services meet the threshold, and they notify to us their service. The moment the service is notified to the Commission has to take a position. So either we have designated them, or we have accepted the rebuttal, or we have opened a market investigation. If you haven't seen any of these, it's because this was not in the notification. So any other service has not been notified to us yet. Maybe it will meet the threshold in the future, which doesn't mean that we might not be, as you have seen for iPad, it was not notified, but nevertheless we have decided that it merited immediately a market investigation for a qualitative designation. So that's just for the principle that applies to all other things that you might be thinking while listening to the presentation. So for that, so let's go, because to the last one, because we said we have 6 gatekeepers that are now the regulated entities under the DMA. However, we had 7 notifications. So we had one company who notified one service, which is their browser, and that's the company, Korean company Samsung, and they also at the same time requested to consider their arguments for a rebuttal of the presumption. So they were claiming that they were not, despite meeting the thresholds, they were not really a gateway between business users and end users. Well, visibly, they did a good job, because they convinced us that the high threshold for accepting the rebuttal was actually met in their case on the basis of, and this is also very important, is what the DMA asks us to do when we look at the rebuttals, on the giving us some examples of what we might be looking at when we assess a request for a rebuttal of presumption, the overall scale of activity with regard to the specific CPS, and the operational circumstances in which the service is provided. And for the 3 services for which we have accepted already the rebuttal, this was the case. So each of them was assessed on the basis of the specific operational circumstances. So in case of Samsung, the browser, and the conclusion was that indeed they did not fulfill the criteria to be gatekeepers despite meeting the quantitative thresholds. I think that's for now where we are. These are the gatekeepers and the non-gatekeepers in the case of Samsung. As Dennis said before, that's not the end of the story. It's actually the beginning of it. Because now we designated gatekeepers on the 6th of September. On the 7th of September, we started discussion with them on what does it mean for them now. And I will actually add that we had already started before, because some of those gatekeepers knew that their situation was to be codified with a decision, but they expected to receive such a decision. So actually some of those discussions had started even before. But of course we couldn't finalize or make them fully concrete before we actually had also the boundaries and the scope of each of the services that would be part of the exercise. So now that we have that, we restarted the discussion on what does it mean for each of the company now, the 20 plus obligations included in the DMA. Not every obligation is applicable to every service. Some of the obligations are applicable to every service that is a CPS. Some obligations apply even beyond CPSs, but when a CPS is concerned. We will go a bit maybe with examples of the obligations also as a refresher for those who have already looked into them, but just to say what are we doing now in the team, and I will take advantage to also answer one of the questions about what are you doing with comp and who's doing what, and are you doing the same thing, are you duplicating work? And like, guys, we are a limited number of people, we are certainly not duplicating work, or we are trying to maximize synergies and do things in the best optimized way. So first the what, and then the who or the how. We are having compliance discussions with the gatekeepers. This has to be a process that will also involve third parties. That's something that we made clear to the gatekeepers. We made clear also to market participants who volunteered to come to us already. So we want to hear, now let me say, it's not a one-to-one dialogue with the designated gatekeepers. By no means. This is a regulatory effort that we are doing to see whether the compliance solutions that will be proposed or are being proposed are actually fit for purpose, not only from the legal perspective, which we are, of course, analyzing ourselves, but also from the operational, practical perspective. And for that, the input from those who are expected to benefit from those obligations or from the opportunities that will become available after the 7th of March, their input will be particularly useful to determine the suitability of the technical solutions in particular. In parallel, of course, and that we also mentioned before, we expect possibly new gatekeepers to come forward, or gatekeepers having services meeting the thresholds in the next financial year. So they might come, and we will have to assess again with the same process, the 45 working days, and then the compliance discussions with them. We have the market investigations ongoing that we have discussed, 4 for rebuttal, 1 for qualitative designation. And then the question that everybody keeps asking whenever we go out and talk in events or something is, do you have, what's going to happen in court challenges, and what's going to happen? We don't know what is going to happen in court. It's the way the rule of law works. We have a regulation, the authority enforces it, and the company, the entity towards which the regulation is enforced, has the right to clarify things with the court if they consider it necessary. So we are ready to explore, and this is a new instrument. It's a new way of addressing problems. Is not totally new because we have the regulatory experience from telco, from financial markets and so on, but still in this sector is a new thing. So guidance that will come from the court will be absolutely welcome from the perspective of the public authority, and I suppose the way the court will decide will be welcomed or not also by the gatekeepers. From our side, whatever guidance will be good because it will help us understanding what we have to do with the legislation. Now, I will give to Dennis the pleasure of explaining some of the things we are discussing with the designated gatekeepers on what they have to do. Not all of them.
Indeed, and as you know, as you probably know, we often refer to do's and don'ts under the DMA. So if you look at this slide and the green light, you can probably deduct that these are the things that gatekeepers will have to do. And, not going in any particular order, but, just to provide some examples. And again, not saying that, these examples are the most important ones and they are being prioritized. For us, compliance with all the obligations, as Filomena said, is important, and it has to be ensured. And in that process, of course, there is an important role for the regulated entity, but also the third parties. So, couple of examples what gatekeepers will have to do in the future. One is, to allow, for example, any third party to interoperate with their own services, of course, subject to certain conditions and certain requirements. So, for example, if we talk about access to certain specific hardware and software features that the gatekeepers have access to when they are providers of the operating system. For example, there are certain conditions in relation to that, and there are also certain potential exceptions, which of course are very narrow, but which account for the fact that, in specific circumstances, there may be certain concerns that may arise from such interoperability, and which would have to be, at least considered and effectively addressed if they would, if there is a risk that they would materialize. Another very important point, which has been raised quite a lot, in particular in the digital environment, is an obligation on the gatekeepers to allow the business users of their services to access the data that they generate in the context of the use of the core platform service. And this is a very important point because it will allow business users to, on one side, use that data for further innovation and expansion of their own services, and then also in the context of the fact that some of this data may also be related to their own end users that use their services. They will also be able to target better their service to their own end users. Another point that was often mentioned, and you will have seen from a couple of slides, one of the important services in the digital environment is the online advertising, because it's often a way for the companies to monetize their business model, but which also raised quite a number of questions in relation to transparency and also access to specific data that the providers of such advertising services may have. So the DMA envisages that the gatekeepers will have to provide access for some of that data and provide some of the explanations, about the price or the reach of the advertising services, but then also with access to data tools and all the information which may be necessary for advertisers and publishers as users of those advertising services to, in a way, check through their own independent means about the reach and the impact of the advertising campaign that they may be engaged in. Another very important point is very often these days, we are using the services that have been mentioned today quite a few times, but very often we have to use, or we are in a position where it's very difficult to use or access services of the business users through alternative means. So what gatekeepers in the future will also have to do is to allow their business users to promote their own offers and even conclude contracts with their end users outside the gatekeepers platform. Again, this is something which has been considered as one of the behaviors that can facilitate access to innovative services, access to services that may be priced lower because of the alternative distribution channels, which may be more effective or less costly for the business users. So talking about what gatekeepers have to do, maybe we can also have a look at what gatekeepers should not do in the future. And again, probably the red light makes it quite clear. One that is quite often referred to and claimed in the digital environment is, the point of many companies or many big digital platforms favoring their own services. And one of the things that the gatekeepers will not be allowed to do is to, in any way, favor their own services and products in ranking than any similar services that may be offered by third parties. Then another thing which they will not be allowed to do is to prevent business users to essentially access their consumer outside their core platform services. Another very important thing is, very often when we buy devices, like phone, the devices come, of course, with the operating system, which we very often today refer to, and which enables the functioning of that device, also with the pre-installed software application. So, in other words, apps. And one of the things that the DMA is trying to do is users should not be prevented to uninstall those pre-installed apps where they want so, unless those are really systemic apps without which the device would not work. And another very important point, and I think there is a question even in Slido, which is about the ideas and points and priorities for Article 5.2, for those that may know DMA also by the numbers and the provisions. What what the DMA is trying to achieve is to empower users to be, a bit more aware and also empowered about the use of their data by the digital platforms and, being able to take control of what is happening with their data. So what the DMA is trying to do is to tell to gatekeepers that they are not allowed to track their end users outside the core platform services for the purposes of targeted advertising unless a specific consent has been granted, which means it's not that it's completely prohibited, but users have to have, the opportunity to provide a consent for such type of a behavior. And these are just some of the examples of the obligations or prohibitions that we have in the DMA. I'm sure, some other people may choose some others. There may be some questions in Slido on some of those. But before going to Slido, I think one thing that Filomena mentioned at the beginning, and I think it's very important, is it's not only about the rules, but also how these rules are implemented and how, the implementation is supervised. And in certain cases, we may also need, a bit more tough measures, like, fines, which again, I think there is a question in Slido. So maybe Filomena can shed some light on those points.
Yeah, I'll try to be very fast because we have been speaking for, I think, an hour and a half, and I hope that the listeners have not yet quit or fallen asleep. So that's just to promise, this is the final one, and then we can go through some of the other questions in Slido which we haven't addressed yet. And I noticed that I promised I would speak about how we split the work, and I didn't, so I will come back to it afterwards. First, just a couple of points that you can see here. I wanted Benedict Cumberbatch, but probably the pictures were copyrighted, so we have a picture we could use by respecting all the applicable rules. For the last few elements that are relevant for the actual work on the DMA and the actual functioning of this new tool. And I mentioned already in terms of governance that the European Commission has been entrusted as the sole regulator, the sole supervisor of these big gatekeepers. However, that doesn't mean that we are on our own, and we actually have in the DMA an explicit reference to a close cooperation with the competition authorities from the European member states that can also help with pre-investigations into the DMA relevant infringements. Now, the DMA structure, however, foresees that the final decision will be taken by the European Commission. So while the investigations can take place also more locally, maybe because a behavior has been shown or a violation has appeared in a specific jurisdiction, perhaps, we don't know. We haven't seen any infringement yet, also because the obligations are not yet to be implemented until March. But that is the type of thing that of actions that the cooperation will entail, besides the fact that we already have some ongoing cooperation for the current discussions with some authorities. And as Rita mentioned at the beginning, if you haven't forgotten the point, we also have a specific body that is an advisory body for the Commission that helps with regard to the other aspects that are relevant in the digital sector, whether it's consumer protection, data protection, media supervision, telecom, and of course competition. So, but besides that, and these authorities, they gather together in the high-level group meetings. We had one somewhere in spring, and we are going to have another one in the next weeks. So again, stay tuned on our communications channel also for that aspect. What does it mean to investigate? Because besides we discussed now the market investigation, which is a bit in the framework of the existing processes regarding rebuttals or designations, but actually for infringements, the Commission can do a lot more. Well, even before infringement, the first thing that will come in March is the so-called compliance report, so gatekeepers. It's one of my favorite provisions of the DMA that says that gatekeepers have to comply and demonstrate compliance. So not only they have to put in place everything that they are supposed to comply with the obligations that are set in the legislation, but they also have to demonstrate how they do it and that they are doing it right. So this is something that was also very important for the legislators. It's there now, and as an immediate step will be translated in a report, like what have you been doing, how your systems have changed, if necessary, to comply with the new obligations. And this will be also, to the extent possible, made public for everyone to look into. So that's the first step. But then, of course, we can request even more information and data, and I mentioned that in the context of the market investigation. But we can do more. We can go on site to do inspections because we want to understand better how the systems work, how the technical side, what it looks like. That we can also do. The legislator has given us this power, and we can interview. We can. By the way, we are soon going to have also a whistleblower tool available, so that also those that will in the future identify infringements can anonymously come and give us information and be protected by the whistleblower protection that is granted in the EU. So these are some examples of what we could do, and there is a question also in the on slide on fines. The fines foreseen in the DMA are that in case of infringement of the obligations of the DMA, so for now, no one is infringing anything. In March, everyone will be complying, those that are obliged to comply. But we don't know what's going to happen later on. If we discover that there are infringements, the punishment for infringement can be up to, first of all, 10% of the global turnover of the company. If it goes towards repeated infringements, it can go up to 20% of the global turnover. And if you think that turnovers are in the neighborhoods of several hundred millions or billions, sorry, I keep mixing up the zeros, several billions, you can see that that can come to a quite high fine in those cases. Now, there is also a question on this in slide. We'll get back to that. It's not the slides that finance enforcement. That's a different story. So this is part of the slide. We often got, also during the negotiations, the question like, but fines don't mean much. These are huge companies, and if the gatekeepers have at least 7.5 billion turnover, what are a few millions for them? This is pocket money. So the legislator has also foreseen the possibility of imposing for systematic non-compliance also more structural remedies. And the slide mentions some examples, not only for example, a divestiture, the famous breakup, which nobody wants to do, but is there as a tool. But also, for example, and that was an idea from the Parliament that introduced it in the final text, the idea of a merger moratorium. So if a gatekeeper is really unable for several times to show that they comply with an obligation, then okay, then you're not purchasing any more companies that, for example, smaller companies that are active in this field. This is something that can also be considered as a possible remedy. This is a bit overview of, let's say, the last part of the governance and enforcement. I hope this presentation was interesting and informative for you. And now I'm happy to move to interrogate Dennis about the questions that you have been posing on Slido. For example, I said I would actually start by myself giving some more indication. So about our internal work with DG.com. So Rita said it at the beginning. We are working as one single task force, one single team. That means that we have, if a company comes to see us, a gatekeeper or a third party or an academic who wants to give us information or whoever, they will come and they will have a discussion with some managers from one or the other Directorate General, members of the team that are belonging to the two. So we have fully integrated teams that work seamlessly across organizational boundaries. So it's a bit of a startup venue within the Commission because it's not the way usually big organizations work, but we have agreed to have this particular way forward. We have agreed to have a joint work to maximize the synergies and the different profiles and strengths that belong to the different members of the team. And I say we are very happy about the way it's going so far. So it's an experiment, but it seems to be working quite well. I don't know if, let's say, where do we start? Dennis, do you want to explain the difference? What is P2B having to do? I call it an uncle of the DMA. So what is P2B doing with have to do with the DMA?
I can actually try, but we had a colleague who joined, who is probably much better in P2B than me. But just in view of the question, so what is the relationship between P2B and DMA? I think it's fair to say that the P2B was kind of like, you know, a first regulation of a platform environment in relation to very specific problems, which was about, you know, the relationship between businesses and the platforms, and in particular, trying to address some of like very basic issues that have arose in the relationship between businesses and platforms, such as the transparency of the terms and conditions, the problem that the platforms were quite often terminating or changing the terms of the service quite unexpectedly and without prior warnings. So these were like some of the issues that the P2B regulation tried to address. For a wider system of the platform economy, also aim to provide certain alternative dispute resolution mechanism in case the disputes would arise and one would try to address them, while the DMA really came in a way as on top of this and try to address very specific issues which have been identified in relation to a very large of these platforms. Because in the platform economy, not all issues and problems are necessarily the same, and they will very much depend on the type of issue one is looking at, whether it's a more societal issue versus economic issue, but then also whether we are talking about platforms in general, or platforms which are essentially, acting as gateways. And the DMA is really trying to address the more economic concerns related to these very large digital platforms that act as gateways. So the two set of rules are essentially complementary. One does not change the other or, preclude the other. So they cohabitate in a way, same as, any other set of rules that we have mentioned on one of the slides, like the DSA or competition law. But coming back to you, maybe, very often we have heard that the DMA is rather static and not future-proof. And we have one of the question is, how will we ensure that future gatekeepers are also captured? So
that's something that actually we also discussed quite a bit in the context of the preparation of the legislation. And in the context of the negotiation, so the conclusion of the negotiation. So some people might say, and there was one of the questions about this, the DMA is a picture of what is today. Well, the DMA has embedded a number of features that actually make it future-proof, and it was by design. So not only it can evolve in the sense of the type of practices, it can evolve in the sense of the services covered, and for some of them we might need to go back to the legislators because it's a regulation. So we need to have it blessed by the democratic organizations. But at the same time, so to your question, the simple, if some company becomes a gatekeeper, they will have to notify and be designated. But if they are not yet gatekeeper, we also have provisions in the DMA that relate to what we call emerging gatekeepers. So they are not yet there. And they are not yet gatekeepers, and yet they deserve, according to the conditions, to be regulated so that they can, that the markets do not, or the sector does not evolve into yet another gatekeeper, but we can prevent that from happening by imposing certain obligations which are meant to curb and to control that type of risk of emerging. So we have the emerging gatekeeper, we have the new gatekeepers, we can capture them, and then if we realize that new services or new offers, and there are questions also about AI, for example, or how artificial intelligence is impacting this, there is a way also to control for the evolution of the technology when it affects existing service. That's already covered by the DMA, but also to evolve the practices and the services in light of the technological developments. We can do a market investigation, we can figure out what's going on, and possibly change the different elements that become relevant. Anything I forgot?
No, I don't think so. But since we got a colleague who is, head of sector of international in our platform directorate, I think even though there is no specific question, one that always comes to one's mind is, it's again EU who is making its own rules, and it's like a small island in a big sea. So, Menno, maybe short presentation, but also views about this.
All right, let's see if this works. So that you can see me. Thanks for the introduction. An important question, I think. So international, I would start off by saying, in this case, needs to be addressed because when you regulate based on a global problem statement, global companies with global services, international effects of your own domestic regulation are inherent. But that is not necessarily a problem, and as you phrase it, Dennis, this shouldn't be seen as the EU regulating on its own island and pursuing its own values. I already hinted to it just now. We face here a shared problem statement. And you see it reflected already in similar efforts around the world, also in statements such as G7 leader statements, and much beyond in international fora, that there is a structural issue of a lack of innovation, which the colleagues have also explained and underpins also the Digital Markets Act in the EU, that derives from this inherent gateway position of large platforms, which are here to stay. But of course, the idea is that we need to make those gateway positions, at least to some extent, contestable, so that innovation is not structurally choked off. Now, around that common problem definition, you should then identify what the Digital Markets Act does to come to the conclusion that, indeed, this is not EU-specific or EU values being imposed on the rest of the world, but in this global ecosystem, it is a universal principle that is laid down in hard law in the EU, and the EU is the first to do that in a comprehensive way. And if I can try to put that universal principle that the Digital Markets Act reflects into words, I would say that it is to ensure contestability and fairness of and imposed by the gateway position that is here to stay, so that our society can leverage the rich pipeline of platforms that we already have today. With proper contestability, we can ensure that whoever occupies the gateway position is under pressure to invest in innovation and to make sure business users on their platforms also are free to choose the services they want, and that in the end, users have real choice. Part of this universal principle is also that the users of the gateway services can continue to rely on their favorite gatekeeper services, but that they have alternatives within the ecosystem or beyond, as demanded by the Digital Markets Act, where they so wish, so that in a way users are informed and can make real choices. That is a universal principle that the Digital Markets Act reflects. If I then quickly move to why are international effects of enforcing your regulation domestically inherent to the Digital Markets Act, this starts, of course, with the fact that the Digital Markets Act applies across borders within the EU single market. That is something particular to the EU. We're a single market of 27 member states, and the largest gatekeepers, those designated, operate across borders in 3 member states or more, and usually in the entire EU and even beyond. So there is an international element also within the EU. But beyond that, even if the rest of the world wasn't to pursue their own legislation to ensure this contestability and fairness, there are direct global effects. And you can think of, for instance, the fact that platforms will have to have their profiling techniques for profiling users audited, which requires expertise in this very specialist domain. And if you add that up to the auditing requirements in the Digital Services Act, the other piece of legislation that is now in force in the EU, that will result in the building up of a very specialist and important auditing capability in the EU, from which the rest of the world would stand to benefit. And similarly, if other laws in third jurisdictions are to pursue similar universal principles in line with the fundamental rights standards that we apply here in the EU, we also stand to benefit from such auditing capabilities being reinforced for the globe in those third jurisdictions. Now, we are sitting here next to the new regulators of these online platforms, and they've just been sharing with you some first real enforcement experience. And this is also, again, an important tool and example for the world from which other regulators stand to benefit and are benefiting as we speak. Earlier today, when I presented the Digital Services Act, I also couldn't help but refer to the workshops that have been organized to prepare the compliance on the Digital Markets Act, where in one of the workshops there was a live demo on an interoperability solution for messenger services, where the person concerned, a stakeholder, a business that would like perhaps to use the contestability offered to provide services on top of the gatekeeper services, showed that you can ensure interoperability using client-side bridging in line with all of the safeguards that the DMA imposes. This is a very important example to show what is possible, even respecting this universal principle that I outlined before. So again, these are direct effects, but beyond direct effects of our domestic regulation, we also need to recognize that many other parts of the world are moving to regulation. We can think of Australia, Canada, the G7 countries as mentioned, but also much, much beyond. And there is an enormous demand from the rest of the world to learn from the EU's first regulatory experiences and to exchange their own, but also in the end to try to achieve consistency around safeguarding those universal principles so that we can also make sure platforms, no matter where they're provided from, can, if they so choose, implement remedies that are globally consistent and can operate and continue to operate the services that allow us to seamlessly access information across borders around the world. I would maybe stop there because I don't want to take up all the time, but it's a question that I think is particularly important and I'm passionate about. So thank you for the opportunity.
So thanks, Men. I think that's also something very important. I think the starting point you made is very important. Everyone, or nearly everyone around the world, is grappling with the same problem statement. That's this is the EU response to that. This is perhaps the first horizontal and comprehensive solution, and we see that many other jurisdictions are very interested in what we are doing. They are probably not going to do the same as we do, but they are watching, they are perhaps learning, they are improving, maybe even what we do, and we will learn from their experiences too. There are many other questions in Slido. Some of them, I have to say, I'm not quite sure I would know how to pose it, but we have 4 minutes left of our time. So let me maybe pick a couple of them for Dennis, as usual, to say, like, there are questions about data protection, for example. So is the DMA obliging gatekeepers to reveal personal data?
No, and this would really be one of those myths that I think it's very important to get them off the table. So I mean, the DMA, same as with the competition law, same as with P2B regulation, DSA, does not change in any way the GDPR and the safeguards when it comes to processing of personal data that are provided in the GDPR. Which does not mean, of course, that, you know, some of the provisions and some of the obligations or prohibitions in the DMA would not be relevant also from the perspective of, you know, our personal data and the way, you know, they're either handled by the gatekeepers, you know, the famous 5.2 obligation I mentioned, but then also, you know, we have an obligation in the DMA which aims to ensure that we as, you know, end users of gatekeeper services can port our data to any other service that we may want to. But all that has to happen, you know, of course, in full compliance with all the safeguards of the GDPR. So, you know, if anything of this requires, for example, consent under the GDPR, I mean, we as end users who want to port our data, you know, should be able to give those consents. Same as, you know, in relation to the 5.2 obligation I have already mentioned. And finally, it's also for the gatekeeper to ensure, you know, implementation of their obligations in a way that doesn't undermine the GDPR. So, yes, there is nothing in the DMA that would in any way undermine our personal data and its protection.
Then let's close it maybe with one word. Actually, I have been given the task of telling you that tomorrow there will be more sessions of the Connect University, and they will be still on platforms, but they will be on data platforms and in the morning, and on AI in the afternoon. So it's if this was interesting, if DSA was interesting, wait for tomorrow because it will be even more interesting. Although the DMA is the most interesting of all, but I'm not objective. I am fully objective, as you can imagine. So thanks very much for listening. It was fun for us. We hope collectively that it was fun for you as well to discuss, to learn a bit about what we are doing and what's happening in the world of the DMA. And wish you a great end of the afternoon and great sessions for the next days. Thank you.